my background is in accounting information systems. So I've been, in accounting and all that kind of stuff. And then I had the privilege of being a finance guy for a seed and soil health company, which I was joined in 2013. And during that process, not only was I doing, the accounting work for the company, but we got to start to see how farmers and the financial condition of farms in North America. And so most farms, probably over 90, well, I know well over 90%, at least at that time, and it hasn't changed much since then, are farmed with what we call conventional farming, which is a monocrop is grown, cash crop is grown every year. There's a lot of tillage, sometimes 2-3 passes of tillage over the field. There's a lot of synthetic chemicals and fertilizers that are put on, herbicides, insecticides, and all that kind of stuff to grow that crop. But what happens is, you're in essence, when you farm in that monocrop method, you're depleting the soil. You're mining the soil of its nutrients, of its microbiome, of its capability to produce healthy plants, and so on and so forth, because there's not a lot of change. There's not a lot done to maintain it. And a farmer has to think of his soil as a bank. You get out of it what you put into it. And so I had the privilege of working with a renowned, back then the term regenerative agriculture didn't even exist. It was just, we called it no-till farming or no-till with cover crops or something like that. But it became what is known today as regenerative agriculture management. And so there's basically 6 principles to that. And one of the things is you stop tillage. So you go no-till. You try to keep some kind of armor or protection on the soil. You try to keep a living root in the soil, and the reason you do that is to continue to host that funguses that produce those nutrients for you. And then you have some form of reinoculation through the use of livestock, and it can be as little as 6 weeks out of the year that you'd have livestock on it. And so and there's things like context and a few other things, but those are the core principles of the regenerative ag thing. And so the thing that really bothered me about farmers is, number one, the average age of a North American farmer is 58 years old, and that age is climbing every year. So that means younger farmers are not getting into the business. And the question is, why not? And the reality is, I don't know of many industries where there's so much capital at risk for so little return as farming. And yet farming, food production, what in any way, shape, or form, is the core of life, really. Water and food. And so that's a huge concern. The other thing that was concerned is there's a steadily decline, and I think it's on the average of 100,000 acres a year. We're losing farmland in North America. It's going into development, it's going into other uses or whatever. And so at some point you hit a pinch point where you don't have enough land to produce enough food. You've mined the land that you do have pretty much to death, and you plateau or start decline your food production capabilities. Now, as of today, we're still, a net exporter of food and grain and things to the world, but that is slowly coming to a pinch point. So that whole thing started me down the path of, how do we make farming more profitable for people so that younger people, younger generations, next generations want to get involved in it and want to be a part of this? And so when working with farmers, the whole thing was, well, if I'm 58 years old, and the other thing is it takes some time to transition a farm operation or a ranch operation from a conventionally managed practice to a regenerative way. And on average, we've seen that takes about 7 years. Now, there's some that'll do it in 5, others may take 10, things like that. And the way we measure that progress is how much the soil organic matter increases during the time frame. So soil organic matter is kind of a measurement of soil health. And an interesting fact about soil organic matter, every 1% that you go up in soil organic matter, you increase the water holding capacity of that ground by 27,000 gallons per acre. So this produces a lot of more drought tolerance and more resistance to dry periods. Farming regenerative increases the amount of plant available nutrients to the plants. Your plants tend to become healthier over time. over successive years. And the real benefit, where the profitability comes from, is the eventual. You can reduce your input costs. You can reduce the amount of fertilizer, the amount of insecticides or herbicides that are needed to keep pests and weeds and things at bay. And that's where the profitability comes from in regenerative agriculture. So by doing that, on average, we can double the profitability of a farm operation, but it does take a transition period. And so a lot of these guys are saying, hey, I don't have the financial capability to, sustain maybe 3 years of reduced yields or reduced returns as I make this transition. Or, you know what, I'm too old. I've been doing it this way for 30 years, 40 years. I'm not going to make a change now. And so that was kind of the catalyst for what eventually became Big Sky Capital Group. And the whole idea behind that, our company, is to find those properties, those farm operations, those ranch operations where people maybe are retiring or they want to get out of it, or they're just having a hard time. I mean, farming this year doing very well, but a few years ago it was very difficult, and suicide rates were, I think, second only to military people with PTSD symptoms. So the suicide rates were pretty significant, especially in the High Plains region. So that really hit me as well. And so, like, what can we do to help these guys? And so our fund, basically, we step in. We'll maybe buy a farm or a ranch from somebody that's retiring, and we'll run it through a transition process, either working with another local farmer who is a regenerative, who has taken up regenerative agriculture, or we'll put our own manager on it. We'll transition that farm, and then we'll hopefully sell it back to a person in a younger generation that wants to continue farming and wants to continue that process. And by doing that, we strive to double the profitability and also give our limited partners a decent return and a tax benefit for helping us do that. So I jokingly call it the fix and flips for farms.
So the fund. Let's talk a little bit about the actual fund structure itself. You've done a
Mm-hmm.
great job of telling about what is the strategy from a scientific regenerative ag perspective.
Sure.
Let's just touch a little bit about, like, what is the structure of Big Sky Capital. How much are you raising?
Yeah.
How does an investor into Big Sky Capital get a return on their investment?
Yep.
How does that work?
Okay. So what we have is a traditional, what's commonly referred to as a traditional fund structure. We have a general partner entity that owns 20% of the fund, that kind of oversees it and kind of is the catalyst there. 80% of it, the fund then, is sold to limited partners, accredited investors who can buy in and starting at $100,000 into the fund. And for the total fund amount, we're raising about $150 million. And the reason we kind of targeted that number, it's small enough to keep us, give us some of the exemptions that we need, but it's large enough to let us do several properties, on average, maybe about 10 properties, and kind of really get a management structure, a fund management structure in place, managing these types of operations. And so, and then we have a third entity, which is the management company that oversees the investments, oversees the returns. And the benefits to our limited partners is, number one, there's a big tax benefit to them. A little known fact is there's, those of you that are familiar with the multifamily space know there's a lot of cost segregation analysis done on properties. And we brought that to the farm and ranch space, which there's not a lot of people doing that. And so that maximizes the tax benefit that our investors can get from that. Especially if somebody has a lot of income, they're looking to offset that benefits them. And the other thing is, we're looking to buy farms that are just beat down and heavily eroded, depleted, that kind of thing. So those can be bought at a discount, versus once they're transitioned and once we've raised the soil organic matter, that land actually sells at a premium. So there's a spread there that our investors partake in as well.